Take your cheap clothes somewhere else. This company isn't a homeless shelter." The receptionist's voice cut across the main lobby loud enough for every employee near the entrance to hear. She extended one arm like a barrier and blocked the turnstile, staring down a man in a faded jacket and worn jeans who had just stepped through the front doors. A few people nearby laughed. 2 security guards moved in, positioning themselves as though he were a threat. Nobody asked his name. Nobody asked why he was there. The man said nothing. He simply looked up at the logo mounted above the entrance, the logo of the company he had built from nothing. Then his phone came out, and everything changed. The truck had seen better days. The paint along the driver's side door had faded to a dull gray, and the rear bumper carried a dent that had never been fixed. Logan Pierce pulled into the parking structure on the east side of the Northbridge Systems headquarters at 7:43 in the morning, cut the engine, and sat there for a moment, looking at the building through the windshield. 43 floors of glass and steel rising above the downtown skyline. His name was not on the front of the building. He had made that decision deliberately when they broke ground 12 years ago, and he had never regretted it. The company did not need his name. It needed to stand on its own. He had been out of the country for the better part of 4 months. The work had taken him through 3 continents meetings and Frankfurt site evaluations, and Sao Paulo, a long stretch in Singapore, where he had spent more time in server rooms than in hotel beds. During that stretch, he had also quietly visited 4 of Northbridge's regional offices, without announcing himself in advance. What he found in those visits had not sat well with him. The gap between what the company presented in quarterly reports and how its people actually behaved in the building was wider than he had expected. Some of it was small, how staff spoke to one another in the break room, whether managers acknowledged the cleaning crew or looked through them entirely. Some of it was not small at all. In one regional office, he had watched a senior manager walk past a vendor who had been waiting in the lobby for over an hour without so much as making eye contact. The vendor had a confirmed appointment. Nobody had told him it had been rescheduled. Nobody had bothered. Logan was not the kind of man who made decisions based on instinct alone. He watched. He gathered. He waited until the picture was complete before he drew any conclusions. But by the time his flight landed back in the States, he already knew what he needed to see. He needed to see the headquarters, not the version of it that existed when the executive team knew he was coming, with the lobby polished and the staff briefed and everyone moving through the halls with a certain deliberate professionalism. He needed to see what it looked like on an ordinary Tuesday morning when nobody was expecting him. That was why he had left the car service behind. That was why he was wearing jeans that had gone soft at the knees and a jacket he had owned for the better part of a decade. Nothing about his appearance suggested a man who controlled a majority stake in a company valued at several $billion. That was the point. He was not trying to trap anyone. He simply wanted to see what was real. He climbed out of the truck, crossed the street, and walked through the main entrance. The lobby of Northbridge Systems headquarters had been redesigned 2 years earlier. Logan had approved the budget from overseas, reviewed the renderings on a video call, and signed off on the final plans without ever seeing the finished result in person. Now he was seeing it. The space was impressive high ceilings, a long reception desk in brushed steel, and white stone digital displays running along one wall showing product highlights and company metrics. The floor was polished concrete. There were a few clusters of seating near the windows, all clean lines and neutral tones. It looked exactly like what a technology company of this size was supposed to look like. Logan moved toward the front desk, taking in the space as he crossed it, noting the positions of the security stations, the placement of the display panels, the angle of the cameras mounted at each corner of the ceiling. He had approved the camera system as well. 16 units covering the entire ground floor, no blind spots. He had been particular about that. The woman behind the counter was in her late 20s, dark hair, pulled back a headset resting around her neck. Her name tag read, Amber Collins. She was in the middle of a quiet conversation with a colleague, something about a coffee order, and whether the cafe on the third floor was open yet, and she did not acknowledge Logan when he stopped in front of the desk. He stood there for a few seconds. She finished what she was saying, glanced in his direction, and the expression that crossed her face was brief but unmistakable. It was the look a person gives when they have already made a decision before asking a single question. "Can I help you?" she said, and her tone made clear that she was not entirely sure she wanted to. Logan told her he was there to see the executive floor. He kept his voice, even giving nothing away. Amber looked him over the jacket, the jeans, the work boots that had mud still on the left sole from a construction site visit the week before, and something shifted in her posture. She straightened slightly the way people do when they have decided to become an obstacle rather than a door. She told him the executive floor required a scheduled appointment and an approved visitor pass, and that walk-ins were not accepted without prior clearance. Her delivery was not impolite exactly, but it had an edge to it, the kind of edge that assumed this conversation was going to end with him leaving. Logan said he understood, and asked if she could place a call upstairs to confirm his appointment. Amber told him that without a name in the system, there was nothing to confirm. She asked whether he had a contact name, someone on the executive team who was expecting him. The question was technically reasonable. The way she asked it was not. Her eyes drifted back to the jacket, then to the truck visible through the glass doors behind him, and she did not bother to disguise what she was thinking. Logan gave her his name. He said it plainly without any particular emphasis, just 2 words the way a person states a fact. Logan Pierce. Amber typed. Something looked at her screen for a moment, and then looked up at him with a thin expression that managed to convey both skepticism and impatience at the same time. She said the name was not coming up in the visitor log for today. That was true. It would not come up in the visitor log because no one had entered it there. He had not scheduled himself. He had not called ahead. There was no appointment to find because he had not made one. This was precisely the situation he had engineered, and he said nothing to clarify it. He simply stood there and waited to see what would happen next. What happened next was that Amber's voice rose. Not dramatically, not in a shout, but loud enough, deliberately loud enough to carry across the lobby to the employees moving through the space nearby. She said that this was a private corporate facility, that it was not open to the general public, and that if he did not have a confirmed appointment and an authorized reason to be there, she was going to have to ask him to leave. She said the words, "leave the premises," with a particular kind of emphasis that made a few heads turn. A man near the elevator bank glanced over, and then looked away. 2 young women near the coffee station slowed their conversation and watched. One of them had a phone in her hand that she raised slightly, and Logan did not miss the motion. Someone was recording. Near the side security station, one of the 2 guards on duty that morning had already begun to move, not quickly, not with any alarm, but with the steady, deliberate pace of someone who had been given a silent signal and was responding to it. Logan watched him cross the lobby floor and take up a position about 6 feet to his left. The guard was a broad-shouldered man in his late 30s, his name tag visible from where Logan stood, R. Caldwell. He said nothing, made no gesture of aggression, simply stood where he had been directed to stand. Logan noted the restraint. He noted it the same way he noted everything else. Amber was not finished. She looked at him with something that had moved past impatience into something colder, and said loudly enough that there was no question she intended to be heard, that he should take his cheap clothes somewhere else, that this was a professional environment, and that Northbridge Systems was not a homeless shelter. The lobby went quieter than it had been before she said it. Not silent. The ambient noise of the building continued, the low hum of the HVAC, the distant sound of an elevator arriving, but the people nearby had gone still. A few of the employees who had been drifting toward the exits or the elevator now stayed where they were watching. The second security guard had moved closer as well, positioning himself a few feet to Logan's right. Between the 2 of them, the message was clear. Logan looked once at Caldwell and once at the other guard, and neither man met his eyes. Caldwell's jaw was set in the neutral expression of someone performing a duty he has not fully chosen. Logan did not respond to what Amber said. He stood where he was, his expression unchanged, and let the words settle into the air without reacting to them. The silence that followed was not his silence. It was the lobby's silence, the kind that happens when a room collectively registers that something has gone wrong. He could have ended it right then. It would have taken 30 seconds. He could have said his name again, this time with context, and watched Amber's face change. He could have asked to speak with Olivia Grant and let his title speak for itself. He had done that kind of thing before at other companies in other rooms, when time was short and the situation required speed. But this morning, time was not what he was short on. What he wanted was information, not the kind that lived in quarterly reports or HR assessments or the carefully worded updates his executive team sent him on Friday afternoons. He wanted to know how far this would go. He wanted to know who else in this building would choose the same road that Amber had just chosen, and who would not. So he stayed where he was. He kept his voice level. He said again that he simply needed to make contact with someone on the executive floor, and that he was confident the matter could be resolved quickly if someone would make a call. Amber's response was to pick up the desk phone and dial an internal number. For a moment, Logan thought she was doing exactly what he had asked, but the way she held the receiver, the way she turned slightly away from him while she spoke, told him she was not calling upstairs in the way he had meant. She was calling someone to come down and deal with the situation, to deal with him. He waited. He was good at waiting. It took Derek Lawson 4 minutes to arrive. He came out of a door behind the reception area, a heavy-set man in his mid-50s, gray at the temples, wearing a lanyard with a senior administration badge that swung as he walked. He had the bearing of someone who spent most of his professional life moving through a building he considered his personal domain. His expression as he crossed the lobby toward Logan was one of mild irritation and total certainty. He did not look at the security guards. He did not look at the people standing near the walls watching. He looked only at Logan, and the look said everything about how he had already categorized the situation before he had heard a single word. He did not introduce himself. He did not ask Logan's name. He positioned himself between Logan and the reception desk in the way a person does when they intend to be the final word on a subject, looked Logan over once, in the same way Amber had the jacket, the boots, the overall picture, and told him in a flat voice that he needed to step outside. Logan asked who he was speaking with. Derek said his name and his title without warmth, then repeated that Logan needed to leave the building. He said that the way things looked, the way he was dressed, the way he had arrived with no appointment and no clearance, was creating a disturbance in the lobby, and that it was not acceptable. He said the word disturbance as though Logan had been shouting, when in fact Logan had not raised his voice once since he walked through the door. Logan told Derek that he understood his concern, and that he had no intention of causing any difficulty for anyone. He said he was simply there to meet with someone upstairs, and that he believed a single phone call to the right person would clarify everything. He kept the sentence short and gave no further detail. Derek's response was immediate and dismissive. He said that without proper identification, a scheduled appointment and an approved visitor request filed through the company system at least 24 hours in advance, there was no one upstairs who would be coming down to verify anything. He said it with the confidence of a man who had spent years enforcing policies he had helped write, and who had never once been wrong about where the power in a room actually sat. He turned slightly toward Caldwell and gave a small nod. Caldwell moved a half-step closer, not aggressively, but with the unmistakable body language of someone who has been directed to apply pressure. Logan looked at him briefly, and then looked back at Derek. Around them, the lobby had filled slightly, as the morning traffic picked up more employees arriving, more people crossing through on their way to elevators and staircases. Several of them were slowing down. The small scene that had begun at the reception desk had now expanded into something larger, with Derek Lawson at its center and Logan Pierce standing across from him in a jacket that had cost $42 at a surplus store a long time ago. Logan said one thing before Caldwell reached him. He said he would like to speak with the chief executive officer. He said it calmly, without demand or desperation, as a man who knew that the request was reasonable and was willing to wait for a reasonable response. Derek Lawson looked at him for a moment, with an expression that managed to combine contempt and amusement. And then he said something that Logan would remember for a long time after that morning was over. He said that even the CEO would not waste her time on someone like him. He said it the way people say things they are completely certain about, not cruelly exactly, but with the absolute, unexamined confidence of a man who has never had to question which side of a lobby he belongs on. Logan did not answer. He looked once more at the logo on the wall above the reception desk, the same logo that had been approved in a conference room he could walk to right now, with his eyes closed, and then he looked back at Derek Lawson and said nothing at all. Outside, through the glass front of the building, a long black vehicle was pulling up to the curb. The limousine came to a full stop at the curb directly in front of the main entrance. Through the glass facade of the lobby, everyone could see it. A long, dark vehicle polished to a mirror, finished the kind that announced its passenger before the door ever opened. Derek Lawson glanced toward it without much interest, at first the way people glance at something that does not concern them. Then the driver stepped out and moved to the rear door, and Derek's expression shifted slightly, the way it does when a person recalibrates what kind of morning they are having. Olivia Grant stepped out onto the sidewalk. She was in her mid-40s, dressed in a charcoal blazer over a cream blouse, her posture the kind that does not come from trying to look composed, but simply from years of being the person in the room that everyone else is watching. She had been the chief executive officer of Northbridge Systems for 6 years. Before that, she had spent a decade in operational leadership roles that had taken her through 4 different companies, 2 of them turnarounds that most people in the industry had not believed were salvageable. She was not a woman who walked into rooms slowly, and she did not walk into the lobby slowly now. She came through the front doors at pace, her eyes moving across the space the way they always did, taking in the room in a single sweep, cataloging what was there. And then she saw Logan Pierce standing near the reception desk, surrounded by Derek Lawson and 2 security guards and the quiet wreckage of the last 20 minutes, and she stopped. It was not a dramatic stop. She did not gasp. She did not reach for her phone or call out his name. She simply stopped walking, and for just a moment, the professional composure that she wore as naturally as the blazer showed the faintest crack, not of alarm, but of recognition so complete that her body responded before her mind had fully processed the situation. She had not seen Logan in person for nearly 4 months. She had received his messages, taken his calls, filed his approvals. But she had not stood in the same room with him since before he left for Frankfurt, and seeing him now, here like this, in that jacket in the middle of whatever this was, required a full second of adjustment before she could move again. Then she moved, crossing the lobby floor toward him, and when she reached him, she lowered her head in a brief, deliberate bow. The kind of gesture that means something, the kind that is not performed for an audience, but that an audience cannot miss. The lobby registered it. Amber Collins, standing behind the reception desk, went still. Derek Lawson's expression flickered from authority to confusion in the space of about 2 seconds. The employees who had gathered at the edges of the space, the ones who had been watching with the comfortable detachment of people witnessing someone else's problem, were no longer comfortable. The geometry of the room had shifted, and none of them were quite sure yet what they were looking at. Logan looked at Olivia and gave one small, almost imperceptible shake of his head. She read it immediately. She had worked closely enough with him over the years to understand the full instruction contained in that single motion. Do not say, "My name." Do not explain. Let this continue. She straightened and clasped her hands in front of her and said nothing, standing slightly to one side of him with the calm of someone who has been told to wait and has decided to wait well. Derek Lawson did not understand what had just happened. That much was visible on his face. He was a man who organized his understanding of any situation around visible, legible hierarchies, titles on lanyards, the floor a person worked on the cut of their clothes, the car they arrived in. What he had just witnessed did not fit cleanly into any of those categories, and so he resolved the dissonance the only way he knew how, which was to discard the parts that did not conform. He told himself that Olivia Grant was greeting a former client, or perhaps a board-level contact, someone she had met before who had wandered in without proper procedure. It was an inconvenience. He would sort it out. He stepped forward and addressed Olivia directly, his voice carrying the particular authority of a man who has not yet realized he has already lost. He told her that the situation was under control, that the individual he gestured toward, Logan, without looking at him, had been asked multiple times to leave the premises and had refused to comply, and that he was in the process of arranging for a formal removal. He said it as though he were filing a brief report with a superior, tidy and confident. He did not lower his voice. He did not seem to consider that doing so might be wise. Olivia looked at Derek for a moment without any expression at all. Then she looked back toward the front of the lobby and said nothing. She did not correct him. She did not contradict him. She simply did not confirm him either, and the absence of that confirmation should have told Derek something. It did not. Amber, emboldened by Derek's presence and her own conviction that she had been right all along, spoke up from behind the desk. Her voice was louder than necessary, and it had the edge of someone performing for an audience they believe is still on their side. She said Logan had been causing a disruption since he arrived, that he had no appointment, no clearance, and no legitimate reason to be in the building. She said the word legitimate, the way people say it when they mean something less polite. She added that the whole thing was clearly some kind of act, that he was drawing attention to himself on purpose, and that she was not going to be made to feel like the unreasonable one for doing her job. The room had filled further in the last few minutes. The morning arrival wave had brought more employees through the main entrance, and a number of them had slowed or stopped, sensing that something worth watching was happening. One of the managers from the 4th floor, a man named Gary Sutton, who ran a mid-size operations team, had joined the edge of the gathering. He had heard enough of the exchange to form a view, and the view he had formed aligned neatly with the view of the people who outranked him in the immediate vicinity. He stepped forward and said that if the individual was refusing to leave voluntarily, they should escalate to a formal trespass procedure and issue a written ban from the property. He said it with the efficiency of someone proposing a motion in a meeting, as though the situation were administrative rather than human. Another manager standing nearby, a woman named Sandra Cole, who oversaw a client services division on the 7th floor, nodded and added that the behavior was disruptive to normal business operations, and that there were protocols for exactly this kind of situation. Neither of them had been present for the first 10 minutes of what had happened. Neither of them had asked. Derek nodded and said he had already considered that option. He turned to Caldwell and told him to contact the building's access control office and initiate a lockout on the visitor system specifically flagged to prevent re-entry by the individual currently in the lobby. Caldwell, who had been doing his job steadily and without malice throughout the entire morning, pulled out his radio and began to make the call. He did it without any visible enthusiasm. He did it because he had been told to, by someone whose authority over him was direct and clear, and he saw no path at that moment that did not require him to follow the instruction. Logan watched all of it. He watched Amber's performance, and Derek's certainty, and Gary Sutton's efficient cruelty, and Sandra Cole's offhand endorsement of a situation she had not bothered to investigate before joining. He did not look away from any of it. He was not memorizing it for the satisfaction of a later reversal. He was simply seeing it clearly the way you have to see something clearly before you can decide what it means and what it requires. The picture was complete now. He had what he had come for. The announcement over the access control system came through Caldwell's radio in broken but audible fragments, A formal lockout request, filed against an unidentified walk-in, flagged for security review effective immediately. Derek crossed his arms. Amber straightened her posture. Gary Sutton took a small step back, satisfied that the administrative process had been engaged. Sandra Cole returned to her earlier conversation, as though the matter had been resolved. Then Logan reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and took out his phone. He did not make a show of it. He pulled up a number he knew by memory-pressed call and held the phone to his ear. The call connected in less than one ring, which meant the person on the other end had been expecting contact. He said 3 words short, direct no preamble, and ended the call. The entire exchange took under 30 seconds. For a moment, nothing happened. The lobby continued its ambient noise. Derek was saying something to Caldwell about documentation. Amber was typing something at the desk, with the air of a person closing a file. And then, every LED display panel in the main lobby changed at once. The product highlights disappeared. The company metrics disappeared. The digital surfaces that ran the length of the far wall and the 2 panels flanking the elevator bank all shifted to the same image. Simultaneously, a clean white background with a single line of black text, stark and unambiguous, displayed at a size that could be read from every point in the lobby. The room went quiet in stages. The people closest to the displays registered it first, and their reactions rippled outward, a sharp intake of breath. Here, someone touching another person's arm. There, a phone dropping into a bag, as the hand that held it forgot its purpose. Derek Lawson turned toward the display panels the way a man turns toward a sound he does not understand, and the color left his face in a way that was not gradual. It was immediate. Amber Collins looked up from her keyboard and read the words, and then read them again. And the expression she had been wearing, that tight, certain, performance-ready expression, simply fell apart. There was nothing underneath it that was ready for this moment. Gary Sutton stood very still with his arms at his sides. Sandra Cole had stopped mid-sentence and was staring at the nearest panel with the particular expression of a person who was rapidly recalculating the cost of a decision they made 40 seconds ago. Olivia Grant stood exactly where she had been standing since she crossed the lobby floor and bowed. She had not moved. She had not spoken. She had simply waited, and now she looked at Logan with the patient acknowledgement of someone who had trusted a process they did not fully understand and had been right to trust it. Logan put his phone back in his pocket. He looked around the lobby, not theatrically, not with any satisfaction visible on his face, but with the same steady attention he had been giving the room since he walked through the front doors that morning. He looked at the display panels. He looked at the people standing in clusters near the walls, some of them with their hands at their mouths, some of them already pulling colleagues by the sleeve and saying things in low, urgent voices. He looked at Derek Lawson, who had not moved from where he was standing, and who appeared to be running some internal calculation that kept returning an answer he could not accept. And then Logan looked at Caldwell. The guard had lowered his radio and was standing with it at his side. The lockout request still in progress, somewhere in the building's access system. He had not rushed to distance himself from Derek now that the screens had changed. He had not adjusted his posture to signal allegiance to the new order of things. He simply stood where he had been directed, to stand doing what he had been directed to do, in the same steady way he had done everything else that morning, without cruelty, without enthusiasm, without anything beyond the plain execution of his duties. Logan had read his name off the badge earlier, when Caldwell first moved to take up his position near the desk. R. Caldwell. He had noted it then the same way he had noted the camera angles and the position of the display panels, quietly, without drawing attention to the fact that he was noting anything at all. The lobby of Northbridge Systems headquarters, which had begun the morning as a polished, efficient, unremarkable space, was now something else entirely. It was a room full of people who were beginning to understand, at different speeds and with different degrees of alarm, exactly what had happened here. And it was a room that still had not heard Logan Pierce say a single word about who he was. Everything they now knew had come from a screen. He had not announced himself. He had not defended himself. He had simply waited until the truth arrived on its own, and now he was standing in the middle of it in a faded jacket and muddy boots, looking entirely like himself. He looked at Olivia and gave a short nod. She understood it as the instruction it was. They were not done yet, but the next part was his. There was a low platform near the far end of the lobby, just in front of the main elevator bank, a raised section of flooring that had been part of the redesign intended for company announcements and all staff gatherings on the ground level. Logan had seen it in the architectural renderings 2 years ago and approved it without much thought. Now he walked toward it, and the crowd in the lobby parted without being asked. Not because anyone had told them to move, but because the room had reorganized itself around a new understanding of who was standing in it, and that understanding moved people the way gravity moves water, without drama, without negotiation, simply according to what is real. He stepped up onto the platform and turned to face the lobby. From that slight elevation, he could see the full scope of what had gathered there, the employees who had been passing through on their way to their floors, and had stopped the ones who had come down from upper levels after someone sent a message. The cluster near the reception desk, where Amber Collins was standing very still, with her hands flat on the counter in front of her. Derek Lawson had not moved from the spot where the color had drained out of his face. Gary Sutton had taken several steps backward and was now partially behind a column, as though the column offered some form of protection. Sandra Cole had moved to the far edge of the crowd and was looking at the floor. Caldwell stood where he had been standing for the last several minutes, to the side at a measured distance, in exactly the same posture he had maintained throughout the entire morning. Logan did not raise his voice. The lobby's acoustics were good, a byproduct of the high ceilings and hard surfaces, and the room had gone quiet enough that he did not need to project. He simply spoke at the level of a man having a conversation, and everyone heard him. He said he wanted to start with what the security cameras had recorded that morning. He said it plainly, without theatrical buildup, as a statement of fact rather than a threat. He told the room that the footage from the lobby system covered everything from the moment he walked through the front doors to the moment the displays changed, and that it had been running the entire time. He said that footage would be reviewed in full by the legal team and by human resources, and that the review would be thorough and would not be subject to any internal influence or editing. He said this once and did not repeat it. A sound moved through the lobby, not loud enough to call a murmur, but present. People shifted. Someone near the back made a quiet sound that might have been a word, and then thought better of finishing it. Logan continued. He said that what the cameras recorded was not simply an administrative failure, not a misunderstanding, not an edge case that fell through a gap in procedure. What they recorded was a pattern. A receptionist who assessed a visitor entirely on the basis of his appearance and made her judgment loudly and publicly in a space shared by dozens of employees. A senior administrator who arrived declined to verify any information and chose to amplify the situation rather than de-escalate it. Managers who stepped in, not to question what was happening, but to accelerate its conclusion. And a room full of people, many of them, who watched all of it and said nothing. He did not say any of their names while he was speaking. He did not need to. Every person in the lobby who had participated in what happened that morning knew exactly which sentences belonged to them. Olivia Grant stepped forward from where she had been standing to the side of the platform. She spoke briefly, her voice carrying the same professional clarity it always did, and she confirmed what the display panels had already announced, that the man standing on the platform was Logan Pierce, the founder of Northbridge Systems, its chairman and its controlling shareholder. She said it without embellishment, without emotion, simply as the factual foundation for everything that was about to follow. Then she stepped back. The confirmation landed differently for different people in the room. For some, it was the final piece of something they had already partially assembled in the minutes since the screens changed. For others, for Amber Collins, for Derek Lawson, For Gary Sutton, it was the full weight of what they had done, arriving all at once, and without anywhere to go. Amber had gone the color of the white stone reception desk behind her. Derek had not blinked in what seemed like a very long time. Logan let the confirmation settle before he continued. When he spoke again, his voice had not changed in register or pace. It had the same measured quality it had carried all morning, the same tone he had used when he first asked Amber to make a call upstairs, the same tone he had used when he told Derek he simply wanted to reach someone on the executive floor. It was the tone of a man who had not been performing patience, but had actually been patient, and who carried no anger that needed to discharge itself now that the room was listening. He said he was not there to conduct a prosecution. He said the events of the morning were not in his view primarily about him. He had resources, and he had standing, and he had 12 years of equity in this company, and nothing that had happened in the lobby that morning had actually harmed him in any way that mattered. He had walked in wearing a $42 jacket, and he was still standing. What had happened had revealed something, and what it had revealed was the question he now put to the room directly. He asked them to consider what the morning would have looked like if the man who walked through the front doors in a worn jacket had simply been a man in a worn jacket. A potential client who had flown in without announcing himself because he had a relationship with someone upstairs, a vendor with a proposal worth reading, a former employee returning to collect paperwork, any person, in other words, who had a legitimate reason to be there, but whose appearance did not signal that legitimacy in the visual language that Amber Collins had decided was the only language that counted. He asked the room what that person's morning would have looked like. He asked whether anyone believed it would have gone differently. He said he had spent a lot of time in the last 4 months watching how people inside this company treated other people when they believed no one of consequence was watching. He said that what he had seen in the lobby that morning was not an isolated incident. It was a symptom. And symptoms left unaddressed became the culture. Nobody answered. The question was not designed to receive an answer. It was designed to be held, and the room held it. Logan stepped down from the platform. He crossed to where Olivia was standing and spoke to her quietly for a moment. A brief practical exchange, the kind between two people who have worked together long enough to compress a lot of information into a short conversation. Then Olivia turned and addressed Derek Lawson directly. She told him that his employment with Northbridge Systems was terminated effective immediately for conduct unbecoming of a senior representative of the company, for failing to follow basic verification procedures, and for creating a hostile environment in a public-facing space. She said it in the same tone she would have used to deliver any other professional decision, not with coldness, not with satisfaction, simply with the finality that decisions carry when they have already been made. She told him that someone from HR would meet him at his office to begin the transition process, and that his building access had already been suspended as of 3 minutes ago. Derek's mouth opened. Whatever he had prepared to say in the moment when someone finally responded to him, whatever defense or explanation or appeal to the hierarchy he had spent 30 years believing would protect him, did not come out. He closed his mouth. He looked once at Logan, and Logan met his eyes without expression, and then Derek Lawson turned and walked toward the door that led to the back corridor, because it was the only thing left for him to do. Olivia then looked toward the reception desk. Amber Collins had stopped pretending to be occupied with her keyboard. She was standing behind the counter with her hands at her sides, and she was looking at Olivia with an expression that had moved through shock and arrived at something raw. Not remorse, not quite, but the particular vulnerability of a person who has been fully seen doing something they cannot explain away. Olivia told her that her contract was terminated for the same reasons, and that the specific language she had used spoken loudly in a public space, in front of colleagues, constituted a violation of the company's professional conduct standards that could not be addressed through a corrective plan. She told her that HR would be in touch. Amber nodded once very slightly, and then she picked up her bag from under the desk and walked out through the front doors without saying anything. The doors closed behind her with the ordinary sound of a Tuesday morning, indifferent to what had just passed through them. Gary Sutton did not wait to be addressed directly. He came out from behind the column, approached Olivia, and said something in a low voice that was not audible to the broader room. Olivia listened, and then told him that the Conduct Review Board would be in touch within the week, and that he should return to his floor. He left quickly without making eye contact with anyone as he crossed to the elevator. Sandra Cole received a message on her work device within the hour, a brief direct notification that she was being placed on a formal conduct review for having publicly endorsed a removal procedure without verifying the facts of the situation. The message made clear that the review would examine whether her conduct reflected a pattern or an isolated lapse in judgment. She had not been the instigator, but she had not been a bystander either, and the difference between those two things would be examined carefully. The outcome, demotion, remediation, or clearance, would follow from that examination. Logan had been specific about that. He did not want the process to be punitive beyond what the facts supported. He wanted it to be honest. Then Logan turned to Caldwell. The guard was still standing where he had been, at a slight distance from the main activity, in the same steady posture he had held all morning. He had not rushed toward the platform when the screens changed. He had not adjusted his position to signal that he had been on the right side all along. He had followed his instructions, done his job, and added nothing of his own cruelty to a situation that had already accumulated enough of it without his contribution. Logan walked over to him, and the two men stood facing each other for a moment. Logan told him that he had read his name off his badge earlier, R. Caldwell, and that the way he had conducted himself throughout the morning had not gone unnoticed. He said that Caldwell had done what he was told, as he was required to do, and that he had done it without aggression, without mockery, and without losing the basic decency that the situation had stripped from nearly everyone else in the room. He said there would be something formal coming through the proper channels, a commendation on his record, and a financial recognition that reflected the standard he had maintained. Caldwell said that he appreciated that, and he said it in the same plain, unadorned way he had done everything else that morning. Not with relief, not with performance, just with the quiet acknowledgement of a man who had done what he believed was right, and was not surprised to be told so. The lobby began to empty in the way lobbies empty when the event that gathered people has concluded, not all at once, but in a dispersal that felt almost reluctant, as though people were still processing and needed a few extra seconds before they could return to the ordinary business of their day. Some left quietly. Some spoke in low voices to the person nearest them. A few took out their phones, though whether to document or to communicate, or simply to have something familiar to hold while they resettled themselves, was not entirely clear. Logan stood in the lobby for a while after most of them had gone. He looked at the space, the polished concrete floors, the brushed steel of the reception desk, where no one was currently sitting, the LED panels that had returned to their standard rotation of product highlights and company metrics, as though the last hour had not happened. He looked at the logo on the wall, the same logo he had chosen 12 years ago, in a room on the 41st floor with 4 other people, and 2 cold cups of coffee, and a whiteboard covered in ideas that had not yet become anything. The same logo that was now on the side of offices in 11 cities. He had not put his name on the building, but he had put something of himself into it, and what he had seen in this lobby that morning told him that something had drifted quietly over time, in the way that things drift when no one is watching them closely enough. He had not come to the headquarters that morning to fire anyone. He had come to see what was real. The firings were a consequence of what was real, not a goal. And the question he had asked from the platform, what the morning would have looked like for someone without his name and his equity and his 12 years of history. With this building was not rhetorical in the way that rhetorical questions usually are designed to make a point and then be forgotten. It was a question he intended to answer. The answer would take the form of a mandatory training program rolled out across every department, built around a single operating principle, that he would write the language for himself, that every person who enters this building deserves the same baseline of respect, regardless of what they are wearing, what they are driving, or what they appear to be worth. Not as a corporate value statement to be framed and mounted in a break room, as a standard of conduct, with teeth in it, reviewed and enforced, and measured against real outcomes. In the weeks that followed the atmosphere at North Bridge, systems changed in ways that were difficult to quantify, but impossible to miss. People held doors open longer. The cleaning crew received greetings by name from managers who had previously walked past them without acknowledgement. The front desk, staffed now by someone who had been transferred from a branch office and who had a reputation for making every visitor feel expected, became the kind of first impression the building deserved. Logan returned to the headquarters twice more in the following month, unannounced, both times in the same worn jacket. What he found was not perfection. It was not a company that had been transformed overnight by a single morning's reckoning, but it was a company that was paying attention now, and that he had always believed was where everything worth building actually begins. He had made that decision while he was still standing in the lobby being told to leave his own building. He had simply been waiting for the morning to finish before he said so out loud.